Okay, so let's talk about considerations for pregnancy exercise during the second trimester. So the second trimester is a weird time. After the first, where you've probably felt like shit for the whole thing and your body hasn't really changed that much, although you've noticed every little millimeter and feel like you've blown up like a whale. The second trimester is when you're going to really start to experience some of those differences. You're going to start to get a belly. Maybe you'll experience like a change in balance. And so like some of these physical differences really start to come into play, and then you have to adapt your training program accordingly. But then at the same time, you might be suddenly experiencing a massive boost of energy. You might no longer have nausea, and you might kind of like not be feeling so pregnant anymore. It's kind of a weird and like confusing time and totally different from the first trimester. But again, this isn't set in stone. It can be so different from one woman to the next. This tends to be like what happens around the beginning of the second trimester. So some things are going to change, but you're in this weird halfway house. So the fact that you're feeling better and your heart rate is probably stabilized by now, or it will start to stabilize. You won't be getting those really, if you've continued to exercise, you probably won't be getting those like shooting heart rate things going on. And as you start to have more energy, you really just might start enjoying exercise again and just really feeling like you can do a little bit more and just really enjoying that. And I think that's great, and I think you should really ride that wave and really enjoy it. Still keeping in mind that you want to sort of aim for sort of that 70%. A lot of women experience getting, because they've got this big boost of energy, they go to the gym with this renewed energy and they have a really great class or a really great workout, and then they go home and they're exhausted. So you want to watch that. You don't want to kind of really wipe yourself out. I had quite a long discussion of the belly in the first trimester and all these things that you can do because you don't have a belly yet, and that's going to start to change at some point during the second trimester when you start to show. So things like burpees aren't going to be possible anymore, lying down on your belly. Things like pull-ups and push-ups at some point are going to not be, you're just going to bulge through the linea alba, or the rectus abdominis is going to bulge, and we probably want to avoid those kind of things. So you may, at some point during this trimester, you're going to have to stop doing movements like that. Other things that might involve the belly are things like Olympic lifting. If you're doing any kind of Olympic lifts in like CrossFit, the belly is going to start to get in the way of the bar path. I switched to dumbbell clean and presses during that time so that I wouldn't hit the belly or have to change the bar path. So there are still solutions for these kinds of things. And things like wall balls, for example, are not going to be such a great idea once you've got a belly, because you could just simply hit the belly with the ball, which obviously is a really big no-no. Impact is also going to be likely to become an issue here as you start to put on more weight around your midline, and as the pregnancy hormones, start to increase, and this is usually when women start to feel like they can't run anymore because it just feels heavy. Maybe it feels heavy on the pelvic floor, which we want to avoid anything like any sort of pelvic floor dysfunction or any kind of like prolapse or anything like that. So any sort of heaviness or discomfort in the pelvic floor, you got to just cut out the impact from sports like running or Zumba or whatever else. Zumba you can still do without the without the impact, of course. And it's a time when you might start to get those aches and pains in the hip and in the in the pelvis and in the lower back. And if that's the case, any activity that aggravates those kind of aches and pains, you wanna stop doing at this stage. You might want to replace. This might be the time when you start to replace things that you were doing before. Lots of women start swimming in this stage, and doing lower impact forms of exercise. Things like handstands might get really difficult. A lot of women can continue to do handstands until about the halfway point, and they find they get to a certain point where they just can't balance anymore. But that depends how skilled you are at a handstand. If you're like, you know, a gymnast and you have incredible control in a handstand, I've seen women still hold perfect handstands, you know, days before giving birth. And if that's you, then that's then you could continue going. But as soon as you start to lose balance and feel uncomfortable and feel like the kicking up is uncomfortable and whatever, that's when you'd have to like cut these things out. So again, there's this process of rather than just being like black and white, oh, you're pregnant now, you can't do this long list of things. There's this process of your body changing, and as your body changes, you adapt your exercise routine to suit the current changes that are happening right now. And normally what pregnancy fitness looks like is, if you were exercising before, is gently or gradually removing the things that you can no longer do, but maintaining all of the things that you can still safely do. And that list gets smaller and smaller and smaller as you progress through pregnancy, unfortunately. But it's all good because you're going to get back to it afterwards, and cutting out anything that could cause you any kind of musculoskeletal damage, any pelvic floor dysfunction, or any strain on the abdominal muscles. You just want to get rid of them. Another example might be, so I said about push-ups, but again, it doesn't have to. If you were doing push-ups to the floor and you start to feel like your belly's bulging now, you might be able to continue doing push-ups on an incline for quite some time before you get rid of that in your final trimester. But the big things that we're looking for here are bulging in the abdomen as the belly gets bigger, and that's going to happen in any exercise that requires a lot of pressure on the front of the abdomen, that requires a lot of contraction from those abdominal muscles. So planks, push-ups, pull-ups, things like that. I talked about impact. Finally, we're definitely, if we haven't done this already in our first trimester, which we should have, and in our second trimester, we really want to start monitoring the weight that we're lifting. It doesn't mean if you were lifting weights before, it doesn't mean stop lifting weights, but again, you're going to gradually be reducing the weights that you're lifting throughout your pregnancy. And check out my video on weightlifting during pregnancy for all those guidelines, and to know what a sensible and what a comfortable weight is for you. And that's pretty much it. This is a real transition time where your body's changing. It will change a lot over these 3 months, and so your exercise program is going to change a lot too. But for the most part, we want to be changing in magnitude and not in kind. And there's no kind of black or white formula, because everyone's body is going to change at a different rate. I hope this was helpful. Check out the final part on 3rd trimester exercise.